If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The Reach had always been the garden of Westeros, a land of rolling emerald hills, golden fields of wheat, and the sweet, heavy scent of blooming roses. But as the sun began to climb over the horizon on this fateful morning, the air over the Mander River felt unnaturally still. The birds had stopped singing, and the livestock in the valley below Highgarden huddled together, their ears twitching at a vibration that the human ear could not yet detect. High atop the battlements of Highgarden, Lady Olenna Tyrell stood with her hands resting on the ancient stone. She looked frail, a small figure in mourning clothes, but her eyes remained as sharp as the thorns of her house. Beside her stood the remaining lords of the Reach, men who had grown fat on peace and surplus, now shivering in their plate armor. "They say she flies, my lady," Lord Tarly's cousin whispered, his voice trembling. "They say the Queen of King's Landing has birthed demons from the wildfire." Olenna didn't look at him. She stared at the Rose Road, where the dust of the Lannister army was finally beginning to rise. "Cersei Lannister has always been a woman of grand gestures and small intellect," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "She thinks that by bringing a few overgrown lizards to a siege, she can undo centuries of Tyrell history. We have the walls, we have the grain, we have the numbers. Let her come." But then the sound arrived. It wasn't a roar. It was a low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very marrow of their bones. And then, breaking through the morning mist, they saw it. 3 golden specks against the pale blue sky, growing larger with terrifying speed. High above the clouds, Cersei Lannister felt a sense of freedom that was intoxicating. The wind at this altitude was freezing, biting through her leather armor, but the heat radiating from Tywin's back kept her warm. She could feel every muscle in the dragon's body working, the massive wings displacing tons of air with every beat. She looked down at the world. From here, the great lords and their impenetrable castles looked like pebbles in a stream. She felt like a god looking down at an ant hill, deciding which ants to spare and which to crush. "Look at them, Tywin," she whispered into the dragon's ear, her voice lost in the rush of the wind. "They think they are safe behind their flowers and their walls." To her left, Joffrey shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated aggression. He was smaller than Tywin, but faster, his scales a darker, bloodier crimson. He dove through a cloud bank, disappearing for a moment before erupting beneath it, his snout already glowing with a nascent spark. To her right, Miachella glided with a silent, ghostly grace, the glass flasks of wildfire strapped to her underbelly glinting like emeralds in the sun. Cersei checked the silver chains that bound her to the saddle. She reached down and touched the release lever for the first payload. This was the debt of blood. The Tyrells had played a part in the downfall of her family. They had plotted, they had poisoned, and they had laughed. Now the bill was due. As the dragons crossed the perimeter of the Tyrell lands, Cersei gave the command. Not with a word, but with a sharp pull on the reins and a rhythmic kick to Tywin's flanks. The dragons dived. The sound of the wind screaming through the dragon's wing membranes was like the sound of 1,000 falling swords. On the ground, the Tyrell archers tried to notch their arrows, but their hands were shaking so violently that the shafts clattered against the stone. "Fire!" Lord Tarly screamed from the courtyard. "Fire the scorpions!" The massive crossbows, designed to take down beasts of legend, groaned as they were turned toward the sky. But Cersei had trained for this in the dragon pit. She didn't fly in a straight line. She commanded Tywin to roll, a maneuver that sent Cersei's stomach into her throat as the first iron bolt whistled past them, missing by a hair's breadth. "Miachella, now!" Cersei screamed. The rose-gold dragon banked hard over the outer gardens of Highgarden, the famous hedge mazes and the orchards that fed the city. Miachella's riderless saddle was equipped with a mechanical release. As the dragon soared over the greenery, dozens of thin glass flasks were dropped. They looked like beautiful green rain. For a heartbeat, there was silence as the flasks shattered against the dry leaves and the wooden trellises. And then Joffrey followed. He flew low, his belly almost scraping the tops of the hedges, and unleashed a continuous stream of orange flame. The reaction was instantaneous. The wildfire didn't just burn, it exploded. The green flames combined with the dragon's fire to create a literal wall of hell. The screams of the gardeners and the soldiers caught in the maze rose up to Cersei, but she only felt a cold satisfaction. The beautiful white stone of Highgarden began to blacken. The heat was so intense that the stained glass windows of the great hall shattered, showering the lords inside with shards of colored glass. Cersei circled back, bringing Tywin directly over the main keep. She could see Olenna Tyrell on the balcony, a tiny, dark dot against the white stone. Cersei wanted to see the look in the old woman's eyes. She wanted Olenna to know that all her wit and all her gold were useless against the fury of a Lannister. "You called me a monster, Olenna," Cersei thought as she pulled Tywin into a hover, the dragon's massive wings kicking up a cyclone of ash and soot. "I am simply the end of your story." She didn't use wildfire on the main keep yet. She wanted them to watch the rest of their world burn first. She watched as the Tyrell army, trapped between the burning gardens and the locked gates, began to break. Men threw down their shields and ran into the river, only to find that the wildfire followed them even onto the surface of the water. This was the debt of blood. This was the price of defying the lion. Cersei looking down at the inferno she had created. The green and orange flames danced in her emerald eyes. She raised her hand, signaling the Lannister ground forces, led by Jaime, to begin their final assault on the charred gates. Highgarden, the seat of chivalry and beauty, was now a funeral pyre. And above it all, the three dragons roared in unison, a sound that signaled the death of the old world and the birth of Cersei's empire of ash. On the ground, the world was a chaotic, suffocating nightmare. Jaime Lannister rode at the head of the Lannister van, but he felt less like a general and more like a spectator to an apocalypse. The air was so thick with soot that he could barely see the horse's ears in front of him. Every few seconds, the sky would turn a blinding, sickly emerald green as another flask of wildfire shattered against the towers of Highgarden. "Form ranks," Jaime shouted, though his voice was drowned out by the thunderous roar of the dragons above. "Shields up, watch the debris." He looked up and saw *Miachele* swooping low. The dragon's rose-gold scales were now stained with gray ash. She looked like a vengeful spirit. As she passed, a wave of heat hit the Lannister lines so hard that men fell from their horses, their leather armor beginning to smoke. "Is this war, Sir Jaime?" Bronn yelled, pulling his cloak over his mouth to breathe. "Because it feels more like we're just here to sweep up the cinders after your sister is done playing with her pets." Jaime didn't answer. He saw a group of Tyrell knights, men he had known and jousted with for years, screaming as they tried to claw their way out of plate armor that was literally melting onto their skin. This wasn't the field of fire from the history books. There was no glory here, only the industrial efficiency of slaughter. The main gates of Highgarden, ancient and reinforced with ironwood, didn't fall to a battering ram. They fell because Tywin*, the golden dragon, landed directly in front of them. The weight of the beast cracked the cobblestones. With a single, prolonged blast of golden-white flame, the wood turned to charcoal and the iron hinges turned to liquid. Jaime led the charge into the courtyard, but there was no one left to fight. The Tyrell garrison had been broken by the sight of the dragons. Those who weren't dead were huddled in the corners, blinded by the smoke and the terror. "Secure the keep," Jaime commanded. "Take prisoners where you can, no more burning." He sprinted up the winding stairs of the central tower, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to reach the solar before Cersei did. He had to find some shard of mercy in this ruins. When Jaime burst into Olenna Tyrell's chambers, he found the room surprisingly quiet. The windows were shattered, and the distant roars of the dragons vibrated the floorboards, but the Queen of Thorns sat calmly at her table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. A shadow fell over the room. The dragon Tywin had perched himself on the balcony outside, his massive head filling the entire window frame. His emerald eyes stared at Olenna with a cold, reptilian curiosity, and standing beside the dragon's snout stepping off its back like a god descending from a cloud, was Cersei. She was covered in a fine layer of ash, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes were brighter than Jaime had ever seen them. She walked into the room, her spurs clicking on the stone. "Olenna," Cersei said, her voice eerily calm. "Cersei," Olenna replied, not even flinching as Tywin let out a low hiss that shattered a nearby vase. "I must admit, the dragons are a bit much. A simple letter would have sufficed to tell me you've lost your mind." Cersei pulled out a chair and sat opposite her, mirroring the pose they had taken in King's Landing months ago. "You thought you could poison my world and walk away, Olenna. You thought the Reach was too big to fail. You were wrong." "I was wrong about many things," Olenna said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "I was wrong to think you were just a bitter girl. I see now you are a bitter girl with very large, very hungry toys. But tell me, Cersei, now that you've turned the most beautiful city in Westeros into a charcoal pit, how do you plan to eat? Dragons don't produce wheat, and your men can't march on a diet of ash." "My dragons will eat the flesh of my enemies," Cersei whispered, leaning in. "And as for the wheat, the Iron Bank will provide. They saw the smoke from the coast. They know who the master of Westeros is now." Jaime stepped forward. "Cersei, enough. The city is taken. The army has surrendered. We don't need any more blood." Cersei didn't even look at him. Her gaze remained locked on Olenna. "I promised you a debt of blood, Olenna, for Joffrey, for the insults, for everything." "Oh, Joffrey," Olenna chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "He was a fool, Cersei, a vicious little prick. I did the realm a favor when I put that poison in his wine. He wasn't fit to hold a wooden sword, let alone a crown." Jaime gasped, the truth finally spoken in the ruins of a kingdom. Cersei's face didn't change, but Tywin, sensing her sudden surge of rage, let out a roar that blew the tapestries off the walls. The dragon's throat began to glow a blinding white. "You're a monster, Cersei," Olenna said, her voice steady even as the dragon's heat began to blister the table between them. "But you're a lonely monster, even this brother of yours. Look at him. He's looking at you with the same horror he had for Aerys. You've won the war, but you've lost the world." "I am the world," Cersei said. She stood up and looked at Tywin. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. She simply nodded. "Cersei, no," Jaime shouted. But it was too late. Tywin didn't unleash a full blast. He simply exhaled. A concentrated stream of golden fire hit the table. In a heartbeat, Olenna Tyrell, her wine, her secrets, and her thorns were gone. There was no body left to bury. Only a scorched circle on the floor and the lingering scent of burnt sandalwood. Cersei walked to the balcony and looked out over the burning valley. The Rose Road was now a road of cinders. Thousands of Lannister soldiers were cheering her name, their voices rising up through the smoke. "They love the fire, Jaime," she said, her back to him. "They don't love the queen. They love the power she holds over their lives. That is the only loyalty that lasts." Jaime looked at the empty chair where Olenna had sat. He looked at his sister, who was now leaning against the dragon's snout as if it were a pet dog. He felt a coldness in his chest that no dragon's breath could ever warm. "The debt is paid," Jaime whispered. "No," Cersei replied, her voice drifting on the wind as she watched Miachella and Joffrey circle the burning towers of Highgarden. "The debt is only just beginning. We have a north to burn, Jaime, and a silver queen to greet." She turned to him, her face silhouetted by the setting sun and the rising flames. "Prepare the gold. We march for King's Landing at dawn. We have more wildfire to brew." The once white castle is now a black, jagged silhouette against a sky filled with green smoke. The three dragons roar in unison, a sound that echoes across the Reach, telling everyone that the Gilded Lioness has had her first taste of total victory, and she is still hungry. The morning following the fall of Highgarden was surreal. The sky remained choked with the black, oily smoke of burning orchards, but the ground beneath the Lannister boots sparkled with a different kind of light. Cersei had ordered the vaults of the Reach opened. The wealth of House Tyrell, a fortune built over centuries of harvest and trade, was being hauled into the sunlight. Thousands of wagons stood in a line that stretched beyond the horizon. Piled high with golden dragons, silver stags, and jeweled heirlooms. Cersei dismounted from Tywin's back, her black dragon-riding leathers dusty but her posture regal. She watched as the golden dragon shook his wings, a low, satisfied rumble vibrating through his chest. He, too, seemed to bask in the glow of the victory. "Qyburn," she called, her voice echoing over the rhythmic clink of coins being loaded. "Your Grace," he replied, appearing like a ghost from the shadows of a scorched tent. "See to the count. Every single coin must be accounted for. The Iron Bank's representative, Tycho Nestoris, is waiting in the capital. I want him to see this wealth. I want him to understand that the Lannisters are not just survivors. We are the new masters of the world's gold." The procession back to the capital was a sight of unprecedented power. At the head of the column, Cersei flew atop Tywin, with Joffrey and Miachella flanking her like celestial bodyguards. Below them, the endless line of wagons acted as a physical representation of her triumph. As they crossed the Blackwater, the bells of King's Landing began to toll. This time, they did not ring for a wedding or a funeral. They rang in a rhythmic, terrifying salute to the Queen. In the map room of the Red Keep, Tycho Nestoris stood by the window, his fingers interlaced behind his back. He had seen empires rise and fall, but he had never seen power concentrated so violently and so quickly. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Cersei entered. She was still in her riding gear, a small smear of ash on her cheek like a badge of war. She unbuckled her sword belt and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. "Lord Tycho," she said, a cold, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "You told me the Iron Bank gambles on stability. Look out that window. The wealth of the Reach is entering my gates. The debt of House Lannister, every copper, every interest payment, will be settled by sunset." Tycho bowed low, but his eyes remained fixed on the 3 dragons circling the Red Keep outside. "The Iron Bank is pleased to see its investments returned, Your Grace. But we do not just look at gold. We look at the future. You have erased a great house. You have turned the Garden of Westeros into a graveyard. Can a graveyard generate tax revenue?" "A graveyard generates silence," Cersei countered, stepping closer to him. "And silence is the foundation of order. No more bickering lords, no more scheming roses, only the lion. Does the Iron Bank prefer a stable graveyard or a chaotic garden?" Tycho paused, weighing her words. "The Iron Bank prefers the winning side, and with those creatures in the sky, it seems the winning side has already been decided. Bravos will support you, Your Grace. We will provide the ships for your new fleet and the mercenaries for your garrisons." While Cersei celebrated her financial victory, James stood on the outer battlements, looking down at the city. He saw the gold flowing in, but he also saw the faces of the people. They didn't look like subjects of a glorious queen. They looked like prisoners waiting for their execution. Bronn approached him, leaning against the stone. "A hell of a haul, Sir Jaime. I've never seen so much gold in one place. I suppose my castle just got a few extra towers, didn't it?" "That gold is soaked in the blood of men who were our allies yesterday, Bronn," Jaime said, his voice hollow. "Olenna was right. Cersei has won the war, but she's lost the world. We aren't protectors anymore. We're just the ones holding the torches. As long as those torches have wings, I'm staying on this side of the wall," Bronn replied, though the usual spark in his eyes was gone. The message to Dragonstone. That night, Cersei sat alone in the solar. She took a piece of parchment and a quill, but she didn't write a formal decree. She wrote a message intended for only one pair of eyes. "Send this to Dragonstone," she told Qyburn. The letter contained only a few sentences. "The lion has found its wings. The rose is dead, and its thorns are ash. Come to King's Landing, Silver Queen. See the throne I have built and the fire I have prepared for your children. The debt of blood is ready to be collected." Cersei standing on the highest balcony of the Red Keep. The 3 dragons, Tywin, Joffrey, and Miachella, perched on the spires around her. In the distance, across the dark expanse of the Blackwater, a low, resonant roar echoed back from the direction of Dragonstone. The Targaryen dragons and the Lannister dragons had finally acknowledged one another. The sky was no longer big enough for 2 queens. Cersei took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes reflecting the cold green light of a wildfire torch, a look of absolute, terrifying peace on her face. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.